Hello and welcome to BusyWorksBeats.com. Today we continue the free mixing course that I promised you because you answered our community tab question, which course did you want to see for free? You said mixing and mastering. So this will be part, I think, 3 of our free course right here on YouTube. Please share this with your friends because we're trying to help as many people around the world as possible. Today we're going to focus on saturation. What's the difference between saturation and clipping and compression and all these different things? Let's hop into the DAW and then show you how to use saturation and what it actually is. So first I'm going to show you the frequency spectrum because this will help you understand a lot about sound. When you see the frequency content of a sound, everything starts to make sense. You start to see visually what phasing is. You start to see visually what harmonics are. You start to see what frequency is and what speech is, like S. You know, the S sits around that spot. So now I know what S actually is. It's just a buildup of frequencies in that specific range. Okay, so let's focus on saturation, and we're going to start with what's called the fundamental frequency. I'm going to use 3x OSC to create what's called a sine wave, and a sine wave creates the most pure tone, which is just one frequency. Remember, when I speak, if you didn't see part 1 and part 2, I would highly recommend you go back to part 1 and part 2. We go over EQ and compression. But also you need to understand fundamental frequency. When I speak, it's more than one frequency. This chart over here shows frequencies 20 hertz all the way up to about 20K, okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is that frequency is more than one specific thing. So let's open up 3x OSC and create a simple sine wave. Just to show you, let's go down there. We need a low frequency to start to demonstrate this. Now, the thing is, some people can't hear these low frequencies, so I'll pull it up an octave or two. Okay, so let's do this tone. Now I'm going to mute my mic and I want you to look at this chart and you'll see a horizontal line go across. That represents what's called the fundamental frequency of the sound, which is just the one frequency. Now, some of you may be able to hear that on your devices, some not, but there's a horizontal line at about 300 hertz or so, or 200 hertz. And that's the fundamental frequency of the sound. It's the lowest frequency that the sound generates naturally. You know, the difference between instruments is that a viola won't produce those low frequencies as it's fundamental. It doesn't have the ability to create that frequency. A bass guitar can create frequencies from the low frequencies all the way up to the high frequencies because its fundamental frequency is lower. It's the way the instrument is built and the vibrations in the string. We don't need to go so deep with it. But what is saturation? Okay, so saturation is what allows you to take this simple sine wave or fundamental frequency and increase the harmonic content so that it can be perceived in higher octaves. The same way some people can't hear this frequency over their mobile phone because their mobile phone can't generate that tone or it's not loud enough to produce over their headphones. We need to give people frequencies they can perceive. Okay, so let's saturate this sine wave so that it creates what are called upper harmonics. There are many ways to create harmonics and saturation. The free ways are, there's a plugin called Saturation Knob by Softtube, which I think is really good. It's called Saturation Knob. Okay, this thing is free. Now, FL comes with saturation plugins. I don't like every one of them. I'm just gonna pull them up just to show you, but I don't like every single one of these plugins. I rarely use them. Okay, but I'm just showing you that FL does have this stuff pre-built, but every DAW does not come with everything you're ever going to need. If that was the case, everybody would use one DAW and it'd be like $20,000. Okay, so let's start off with Saturation Knob. And what I'm going to do is turn off my mic and just crank up the saturation. So you may be asking, okay, I understand saturation, but what's the difference between saturation and clipping? Clipping is, you see this little white line up here. Clipping would be if something passes a line or a threshold, depending on the type of clipping, the soft clipping or hard clipping, let's just say hard clipping, it shaves off everything above that point. But you have to crank something going, I got to go full screen with this one. But you got to crank the sound going into a clipper for it to do all that. Okay, you have to crank a sound going into the clipper. When it passes the clipper, then it gets shaved off. It removes all that top end information. And it's not necessarily high frequencies, whereas a saturator takes the whole frequency spectrum and then it takes the one fundamental frequency and creates those harmonics in different structures. You have odd, even harmonics. You don't need to memorize that. It's just different structures of harmonics. So it takes the single frequency, for example, and starts adding multiple upper harmonics. And let's go back to the DAW so you can see this visually. And that's what creates a more dense sound or more full sound. That's the difference between a sine wave, for example, and a sawtooth. They have different harmonic structures. Okay, so now you understand harmonics, and hopefully you went back to video 2 and video 1. Let's saturate this sine wave. I'm going to mute my mic so you could just visually see what happens when we start to saturate this sine wave. Okay, so let's turn off my mic so you don't see any interference. Let's turn on Wave Candy. Okay, give me 2 seconds. There we go. And then let's turn off my mic. Also, I want to note the difference between the low setting, the neutral setting, and the high setting. So I'll commentate after each pass. So again, this is the low mode on saturator, the soft tube saturation knob. Now notice what happened. The sound went from low volume like this, then it got louder, then it got quieter. Now the question is, why did it get quieter? If you go all the way back to our EQ video, part 1, we talked about the Fletcher-Munson curve. Once you get beyond a density of frequencies, things become quieter. The same way bass, we can't really hear it naturally with the ears heavily as we can hear the frequencies from 500 to 5 kilohertz. So the same thing here is that when you saturate something, if its density is being built between 500 and 5K, you're going to get a loud sound. But once you start moving the density to the higher frequencies, it becomes perceived as softer. Okay, so that was the low setting. Now to keep in mind, the sound didn't pass any specific threshold. It just started saturating. They call it non-linear. Okay, so let's do this one more time. Now on the neutral setting. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is turning a simple sine wave into more of a square wave or a sawtooth because we're adding these upper harmonics. We're transforming the actual sound wave. Let's do it one more time on the high mode just to show you again what saturation does. Okay, so they're all doing different flavorings for the harmonics. Now I'm going to move this experiment a little bit faster by pulling this frequency down an octave. And now you'll understand why saturation is important, because you won't be able to hear this over your iPhone headphones or whatever kind of mobile headphones you're going to use. You're not going to be able to hear this frequency. It's so low. And then when I add saturation, you'll start to hear the sound. And that's why we need saturation. You'll notice at a certain point, it got louder, but it didn't have that buzzy sound to it. It just got louder. And that's because we're creating those frequencies in the ranges where we hear things louder without it sounding buzzy, because we're not transforming the specific sound wave to sound like a pulse wave or a square wave or a sawtooth. We're not exaggerating those harmonics that much. So I'm going to move quicker. Just wanted to show you the different types of saturation. Okay, so they're all generating a different set of harmonics. So basically, if you saturate hard, you're going to get a buzzier tone. That's basically what it is. But if you saturate at a subtle level, you get more of a rumbly, filled out tone. It's not going to sound buzzy and distorted like a guitar. Okay, so that's the importance of saturation. Now, there's different plugins to help you do that. Again, there's different plugins. Distortion is basically extreme saturation. Okay, so think of distortion and saturation as the same thing. It's just distortion is when you really push something heavily and transform the sound waveform. So it's the same concept. We're just creating a different set of harmonics. That's one plugin, the Fruity Fast Distort. Another one's called Fruity Blood Overdrive. Again, I don't use these stock plugins, but I understand some people just want to use these for whatever reason. So first thing I'm going to do is turn down the post gain and then turn up the preamp. And this will begin to overdrive the signal. So when people say something has a tone, they're speaking about the harmonic content of a sound. So each of these has its own individual tone. And lastly, we're going to use the Fruity Wave Shaper. Again, I don't use these tools because I just don't like them, but you can if you want. So to create saturation, we're going to move this curvature. That's why it's called a wave shaper. We're transforming the shape or the harmonic content of a wave. Okay, so they're all different tools to use to get that saturated sound. So now that you understand the science of saturation, how do you make saturation sound good? What are the more advanced techniques you could use for saturation? So I'll move a little bit quicker here and give you real world stuff. So firstly is the 808. I know you want to saturate your 808s. Now, again, the difference between distortion and saturation is that distortion is a little heavier, whereas saturation is a little lighter as far as harmonic content. So what I'll do for the Spins 808, which is, everybody knows the Spins 808, shout out to DJ Spins. We're going to run this through a saturator of my choice. Now, think of a saturator the same way you think about reverb. If I put direct reverb on a sound, let me do this now, but if I put direct reverb and just turn the reverb all the way up and turn the dry signal down, it's only the reverb signal. You may think that sounds cool. For certain sounds, it will sound cool. But think of the way that it took away all that original sound and it's only reverb. The same thing you want to think about saturation. It's a seesaw. So the more direct saturation you add, the more you're pulling away from the original sound. And the more, if you go back to video 1 where we talked about the EQ, remember about the harmonics, the fundamental frequency. Let me go big screen on this one. Remember our first video on EQ is that the fundamental frequency is that bottom frequency of this specific sound. Once you start adding that second harmonic and the third harmonic and you start increasing the frequency content, you have things that blur out the intensity of the bass or that low frequency. So what we did in video 1 in the EQ section, we had a sound at 100 hertz. Therefore, every multiple of that, 100 times 2 would be the second harmonic. So that's 200. 100 times 3 would be the third harmonic, which is 300 hertz, and on and on and on. And basically, the 200 hertz was blocking out the boominess of the 100 hertz sound. So what we did was we EQ'd 200 hertz out. And then the sound in the bottom end became more boomy because it's not being masked by that second harmonic. So we want to do the same exact thing with our sound here. We want to make sure that we're not using too much saturation to create those harmonics that get in the way or blur our original sound. So you can either, use a mix level to blend the two signals, having the original and then having the saturated signal play at the same time. You could have the original and you could send a duplicate to another track and have just saturation, or you can have it frequency based to where you can have a multi-band filter to only listen to certain frequencies that get saturated. So we're going to do all those in the DAW. So let me show you step 1. These are all different flavors. There's no one way to saturate anything. So let's do direct saturation, what everybody does. And I'm going to use tools that I would actually use. T-Rex is a good saturator. Isotope is making better saturators. There's just Google saturator plugins. There's a lot. I'm going to show you an industry saturator I like. It's called Thermionic Culture Vulture. Where is it at? Here it is. Kenny Beats was known to use the real deal. So shout out to him. Bringing this up because this is a plugin I love for my 808s. So basically, this is calling it distortion, but I'm going to call it saturation. Same concept. Okay, so let's open up the spectrum here, and we have the Thermionic Culture Vulture. I want to show you what my sound sounds like. Then we'll get into all the other options and flavors. Okay, so here we have the 808. Now I'm going to turn up the drive amount, which is going to turn up the amount of distortion sound that we're going to get. And again, I want you to keep an eye on the graph on the left. Okay, where did our sound go? Our sound disappeared on us. Where did our sound go? Why is it not playing here? Did it get scared? Oh, duh, I have the drive amount all the way down. I'm an idiot. Okay, there we go. Duh. Okay, because it needs a little bit of drive. Okay, so I want you to keep an eye on the graph on the left side. And I'll turn it off just so you can see the original. And I'm even going to mute my mic. Let's do that first. Okay, so you can see how we're starting to clip. So what we want to do here is when we're clipping like this, what we want to do is turn down the output gain. Okay, so we're turning up the saturation effect, but turning down the actual level. So we're getting the distorted sound, but just at a lower level. So we're not going all the way past 0 to get a sound. So you have to mess with the output level as well as the drive. This is how you get those 808s like decap, those decap knock 808s. That rumble, it creates a rumble. So here's without. Very soft, very thin. And here's with. Now again, it's a little overwhelming. It's taking over that fundamental frequency. So what you can do is use what's called a mix level. You might not be able to see it. Maybe my head was in the way. But you can see a mix level here. I'm going to pull the mix level down. So now we keep the original 808 playing, and then we have the additional distorted 808 playing at the same time. So now you're blending the boominess of the original with the saturated version as well. So for example, the way I would use that is I would turn my mix level down, I would crank the drive to go extreme, and then I would slowly pull in the mix level. Then I would pull the drive back. And just keep messing with that mix level. Now for me, I actually liked the amount that we had. Okay, so that would be an amount that I'm okay with right there. So that's one saturator plugin. There's a ton of saturation plugins. Now let's do a different technique, which is so that's using saturation directly on the track. Now let's send the 808 as a duplicate to another track. So I'm going to click here in our mixer and left click to send a duplicate over to 808 number 2 in this case. Now on 808 number 2, this is where you can add saturation. So this is the same thing as a mix knob if your DAW allows mix knobs. So where are we at? Saturation knob, saturation knob, saturation knob. Can I spell today? Here we go. Okay, so we're sending the 808 to a second track as a duplicate, okay? And then on the duplicate, we're gonna add the saturation. So now we have the original, and then we have this other saturator, okay, which we can use and blend in. So I'm gonna blend it in by turning the fader down. And this will be our mix level, so to speak. Now what you could do with this is make it a little more fancy. You could add other plugins to widen out the sound. For example, I could do micro shift just to widen out the image a little bit. So we have an original 808 and then we have one that's saturated, but now we're widening the saturated one out. So you only get the saturation, not only, but you get it more so on the side. And this is how you create more unique custom 808s. And then you could blend this in by just turning it down. Notice how it's still hard to hear the 808. And as I bring the saturation in, it makes the 808 more easily heard. Okay, so that's the second way. Now I'm going to show you a more advanced way. We're going to add a saturation plugin directly to our 808, but this time we are going to use FabFilter Saturn. There's Saturn 2, but I only have the first version. And I'm only going to saturate everything above the fundamental frequency. So right here, it kind of shows you where the energy is. I don't know if it labels the frequencies. Let me see. But we're going to click this plus button. Oh, it does label the frequencies. So what I'm going to do before I open this plugin is figure out where the Spinz 808 lives. Which frequency does it live in? So let's open up the Parametric EQ2. Now, once you get better at this, you don't have to do this every single time. Okay, then I'll show you drum breaks after the 808. So I can see this frequency goes all the way down to 30 hertz, 34 hertz. Okay, so I'm going to affect everything above 34 hertz. And in fact, I'm also going to include 34 times 2 is 68. So everything above 68 hertz, I want to saturate. Now I'm going to go to the crossover point and I'm going to make this above 68. Let's just start at 70 hertz. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the original and make sure I turn the mix level off or just turn the power button off. Okay, some people forget to turn off the other section. Then go to FabFilter. We're going to go to everything else. And here's where I can start saturating the actual sound. So I'm going to saturate everything above, what was it, 70 hertz? so it won't get in the way of the boominess of the 808. And there's different types of saturation. You have clean tube, which is hard to hear because it's subtle. Warm tube, a little more harmonic content. I'm going to keep the graph up on the left so you can see. Okay, so you can see all different harmonic structures. Now, as soon as I get into the amp side, this is where it's going to get a little more heavy with the harmonic stuff, so let me pull it back. Okay, so it's all about your flavor, like which flavor of saturation do you want? What flavor of harmonics do you need for a specific song? Usually the harder you push it, the more aggressive the song sounds. And if you push a sound into distortion levels, usually you need your whole song to be in that distorted type of vibe. Now that we understand how the 808 is affected by saturation, let's use it on drums. Okay, so we're gonna use AJ Hall's, this is called his One Mic Drum Breaks Kit. And I'm in his raw stems file, so we can mix the drums how we like. It's gonna take a random drum break. So this is at 87 BPM. I don't really need a BPM on this, but okay, we're gonna drop it in. So the first thing is let's send it to the mixer, hit Control L. This is a raw drum recording. Now remember, the difference between clipping and saturation is that clipping requires me to push the level going into something. And only until it hits that level will it start to change the waveform. Saturation will affect the sound no matter what level it's at. So let's open up a saturator here. Let's do FabFilter because this is more advanced. And let's use that same philosophy, keeping that kick drum unaffected. Let's just say anything below 70, I don't want to touch. Let's just turn this off. And let's saturate the top end of the drums. And I want you to just hear the difference. You can feel it. Let me turn this off. So here's without. Just look at how hollow the sound is. You'll see a lot of black. And when I turn this on, you'll see a lot more yellow and red. A lot more intensity. Okay, so that's just the warm setting. Okay, so tubes are like physical tubes that bounce around frequencies to create what is it called? Wave cancellations or wave interference. That's the word I'm looking for. So that's a little more advanced in amplification and all this using tubes. Okay, so then at this point you would just turn up the level. And that's how you get your drum breaks to sound harder. So let's turn this off. This is before. Here's after. Now, if it's too aggressive for you, you can always pull the mix level back. And again, what is the mix level? It's just allowing more of that original signal to come through. So here's without. Now, some people may say, okay, you're not doing the right levels. It's not level matching. So what I'll do to be fair is crank this up just to match. You might not be able to see this chart, but basically I'm just turning up the input. So let's say with the saturation, we're going at about -4 at the peak. Okay, so I'm just gonna crank the signal up, the original, until it hits -4 about. It's actually higher than -4. Pull it up one more. So this is the same exact level. So here's before, without saturation. Here's with saturation. Same exact level. And And that's what harmonic content does. It fills out the sound and makes it more vibrant. The same way if I saturate an image, it pulls out all the colors, the red, the blue, the green. Same thing happens in music. So that's how I would use saturation on a real drum kit, just to fill it out. So I can go on for days and days and days. I just wanted to thank you for watching this entire video. If you like this, please subscribe and please like the video to help more producers around the world. We're trying to help millions of people around the world. So I need you to like this and share with a friend who needs help with mixing or wants to learn mixing or go deeper with it. And thank you for watching. It's Game from BusyWorksBeats.com. If you want free courses on music production, go to premium.busyworksbeats.com. I'll leave a link below. Don't worry about it. Thank you for watching. It's Game from BusyWorksBeats.com. Peace out, guys.